All right, let's go fast. Really? Go fast? That's the best you could come up with, Hologram Janeway? Hello, welcome to Alyssa Jean's Reviews, and this is my review for Star Trek Prodigy Season 1, with a particular focus on episodes 11 through 20, which are the batch of episodes that just came out this year. And I will be looking primarily at those, but I will be reviewing the entire season as a whole. And when I give my rating out of 10 at the end of this video, I will be giving my rating out of 10 for the entire 20 episode first season, which includes the episodes from last year. And I do have some things to say about those episodes as well. I did my review for that last year, so I don't want to spend too much time on that part of the season, but it is important that I talk about those episodes in contrast to the latest 10 episodes, because I do feel like there's a huge difference. Anyway, so first of all, there is, of course, a spoiler warning if you have not seen up to the end of Season 1 of Prodigy. So let me go ahead and get into it. The first thing that I need to do is I have to debunk this notion that I have been seeing online. And in fact, one dude replied to a comment that I made on one of my brother's videos espousing this, I would say, nonsense. So I'm going to debunk this right now, this notion that all adults are just not allowed to criticize Star Trek Prodigy. Star Trek Prodigy is exempt from all criticism from adults because it is quote unquote a kids show. So let me just shoot you down right there. If you believe in that, then you're objectively wrong. That is objectively false. And the reason why it is objectively false is that Prodigy is not, in fact, a kids show. It is a family show. Now, what is the difference? So a kids show is directed right at kids. It is marketed specifically for kids. Oftentimes, though not always, it will include specific educational components for kids. It'll have letters and numbers, or it'll have little morals for kids to learn. Not necessarily, but typically that's a part of a kid's show because it is aimed directly at kids. It's not really for adults at all. It's the kind of show that adults will put on the TV so that their kids will be distracted so that they can get on with their lives. A family show, or a family film, because there's a lot of family films, is marketed primarily for kids and is mainly for kids. However, adults can get some enjoyment out of it. In fact, usually in a family show or a family film, there are a lot of jokes or a lot of references that only adults will get. And in fact, the kids will not get those references at all. Whereas a more specific kid show, you won't get that as much. And to make an example, I'll use the world of Jim Henson. So we're talking Sesame Street versus The Muppet Show. Sesame Street is a specific children's show, a kids show, whereas The Muppet Show is a family show. And you look at The Muppet Show and they're teaching numbers and letters and hopefully lessons about, don't be a racist and stuff like that. I know they used to do that in the 70s. I don't know if they're still doing that. But they're teaching kids lessons, and it's very, very specifically geared towards small children. The Muppet Show, while marketed primarily towards children, can be appreciated by adults. And I remember when I watched The Muppet Show when I was a kid, my parents would watch it with me and they would laugh and they would get some enjoyment out of it. And I have watched some episodes now that it's on Disney Plus, and there are a lot of jokes in The Muppet Show that there's no way in hell I would have gotten as a kid. Like, it would have been way over my head. But as an adult, I was like, oh, look what they did there. That's really good. And that's true of a lot of the Pixar films, too. They're more family films, that there are references and jokes that only the adults will get, although it is still marketed primarily to children. That is the difference between a family show and a kid show. Prodigy was absolutely marketed as a family show. In fact, all of the pre-show marketing was really pushing the fact that not only is this for kids, but it also is for adult Trekkies. Adult Trekkies will get enjoyment out of it, and it's specifically marketed that way. So yes, I absolutely 1000% have every right to criticize Prodigy just as much as any other Star Trek show. So I don't want to hear any more of this nonsense that adults are not allowed to criticize Prodigy because it is a kid show, when in fact it is a family show that was specifically marketed toward adult Trekkies as well as children. So Prodigy in the beginning set out for two goals. It had two goals that it wanted to accomplish. Number one, to bring in a new generation of young children to be the new generation of Trekkies and get this new generation interested in Star Trek. And number two, to be a good Star Trek show that adult Trekkies who've been watching Star Trek for years can appreciate. Those are words to stated goals. Now, as far as the first goal, I can't speak to that personally because I am not a child and I don't have any children. If I did have children, I most certainly would be having them watch Prodigy, but I don't have any. So I can't speak to how they're doing on that. But from what I understand, they're doing very well on that. That this is very appealing to children. I've heard a lot of stories about people who have children talking about how their kid is really into Prodigy, and that's good. I am sure that they really are doing a good job with that. I can definitely see this being very appealing to kids. Now, as for the second goal, appealing to adult Trekkies and being a good Star Trek show, this was my biggest problem with the first half of the season that aired last year. I thought it was a miserable failure. In fact, I felt lied to. I felt deceived because I was told this show was also for me, and I felt deliberately lied to in my face because I didn't feel like this show was for me at all. At the end of those 10 episodes, I was like, oh, okay, so you're saying this show is not for me, so fuck you, why should I watch it? Because it's not for me, even though you said it was. So I was really kind of irritated about what I thought was a deception. And the reasons for that, a lot of it had to do with the characters. Dow was an annoying but childish and cartoonish character that was straight out of a kid show, and it was not a character that would appeal to me as an adult Trekkie. And then Rocktop, to me, like his or her voice sounded like, you know, I have friends who have kids, and like sometimes when you're hanging out with your friends with kids and like they want to talk to you, so they put the kids in front of the TV to distract them so they can hang out with their friends, and you kind of hear it in the background and you hear this. That's exactly what Rocktop sounded like to me. Is like, this is a fucking kid show. I was told it was a family show that appealed to adult Trekkies, but absolutely not. And Murph, I'm sorry, I know people love Murph, and I've grown to like Murph too, but in the beginning I was like, yeah, he's from fucking Sesame Street. These are Sesame Street characters. This is a children's show. But it wasn't just that. I think the big thing that shouted to me that this is not for you at all was the complete lack of spatial awareness. So you had this Ferengi that apparently traveled from the Alpha Quadrant to the Delta Quadrant back to the Alpha Quadrant, and so were our main characters doing that without using the Protostar drive, not using any kind of special drive, just going all over space. It took the whole premise of Star Trek Voyager was that it took 60 years for them to get back. But here we have in Prodigy this Ferengi just quadrant hopping like they're going from Earth to Mars to Saturn, like it's nothing. And that told me that, oh, this is totally for kids, because kids are not going to care about that sort of thing. Adult Trekkies will care about that sort of thing. So, oh, it's not for me. So fuck you, you lied to me, it's not for me. So that's what I felt about the first 10 episodes. But since they marketed it as one season, I was like, okay, I'm going to give it until the end of this first season, even though technically I felt like it should have been a second season. But they tricked me by calling it one season, and I had said I would watch the full season. So then we get to episodes 11 through 20. And right off the bat, I did start to feel like that this is for me. There were a lot of references that would be over the kids' heads. we got that one or pretty early on. I think it was 12 or 13 or something like that, with the dudes who talked like Captain Kirk because it was a planet that the original Enterprise had visited. That was something that would be over kids' heads, that I really appreciated, and I actually thought was a much better call out to older Trekkies than that stupid holodeck thing they did in the first half of the season, where they just like took audio from original episodes and it just doesn't fit and didn't work. This was a much better way of doing that, and in general I just felt like, oh, look at that reference, oh, look at that, oh, this is for me, oh, they are speaking to me, oh, okay. Then we got to episode 14, and that's where I got really frustrated again, because that's when I was like, oh, no, they're back to being just a ridiculous kid show. So episode 14 is the one where Janeway is just, Admiral Janeway, the real Janeway, is absolutely convinced that Dal and our crew are evil, and they're these just evil masterminds, and the whole thing could have been avoided by simply having a conversation, and that is one of the most irritating tropes in all of television and film, and I hate it when Star Trek uses that trope. Like, all they had to do was have a simple conversation and their whole thing would have been solved, and I just found it very cartoonish how Janeway was just like, oh, well, they're evil, we must get them, and not even thinking about reason at all, and then circumstance would just happen to reinforce her belief. And the jump the shark moment for me is when Murph just happens to sit on the control panel and fire photon torpedoes. First of all, there's no way in hell anybody could accidentally fire photon torpedoes by sitting on anything. That is the dumbest thing I've ever seen, and it was so cartoonish that I was like, oh, never mind, this isn't for me after all. This once again is only for kids and not for adult Trekkies. And I found that to be really frustrating. Now, I think they did recover from it pretty quickly. They got away from Janeway thinking that they're evil, ridiculous storyline, which they never should have done that in the first place. I could see Janeway kind of being inquisitive and skeptical and trying to figure things out, but being convinced that the Prodigy crew are these evil masterminds was stupid. That never should have happened. So that whole episode 14 should never have happened. But I do think that they recovered from it. And from that point on, I would say the Prodigy was a decent Star Trek show. Had some good little callbacks and references that were definitely just for the adults. And I won't say it was a great Star Trek show. There was nothing amazing. There was nothing that blew me away. But it went from being a childish kid show to a decent Star Trek show, so it definitely improved in that way. Again, not amazing, nowhere remotely close to as good as Strange New Worlds or Lower Decks, or frankly even Discovery. I actually would have Prodigy right now in 4th place in Modern Trek, with Picard, because of season 2, has to be last place. But yeah, so it's not amazing, doesn't blow me away, but it was decent Star Trek, and there were some good moments throughout those episodes. Now, I want to talk about the 2-part finale, Supernova, I think parts 1 and 2. I think that this was a pretty decent 2-part finale. Again, not mind-blowing, not amazing, not even close to being one of the best finales, not even in Modern Trek. I think Discovery outdid it this year. I think Strange New Worlds absolutely did. Even Lower Decks did. But it was decent. And I think my main issue with the finale is that there shouldn't have been a cliffhanger. I think they should have resolved the tension in the first part and then use the second part just kind of as a wrap up to get more of the emotional moments, which they did do a really good job with. And the reason why I say this is because the cliffhanger was pointless because we end part 1 like, oh my God, how are they getting out of this? This is an impossible situation. They'll never get out of this. And then part 2, within 30 seconds, the characters are basically saying, actually, it's super easy. Barely an inconvenience. It's like they figure out how to get out of it within 30 seconds. That solves it. And I mean, granted, it does take them about 10 minutes of runtime to actually execute the plan and to finish it off. But this impossible cliffhanger was resolved immediately. And I know that Best of Both Worlds gets accused of this, which I completely disagree with, because in the case of Best of Both Worlds, the thing that they resolved right at the beginning of the episode, it was just the immediate problem, but the overall problem that Picard is still assimilated by the Borg, and the Borg are still trying to destroy Earth, that was still there, and that was not resolved until the end of the episode. Whereas here, the overarching problem is solved immediately. So I just feel like they would have been better off just wrapping that all up in one episode, and then having the second episode be just kind of the come down from the adventure, kind of tying up loose ends. I actually just watched a show that did that format, which was His Dark Materials season 3, the final season, where episode 7, like, everything was seemingly wrapped up, but then there still was a lot of loose ends to tie up and a lot of the emotional stuff to do in the final episode. And so I think that's a legit way of doing a finale. So I wouldn't have begrudged him that. And in fact, I think it would have been much better rather than having this phony cliffhanger that is solved immediately. So I can't say that this is an amazing finale, but in that second part, which I do wish it was the whole thing was just this, there were some really emotional moments, like Janeway, holographic Janeway, saying goodbye, and the crew being tearful about it. That was a really touching, emotional moment. And saying goodbye to Gwen, and the crew, realizing they finally get to fulfill their dreams and they get to be a part of Starfleet, and Admiral Janeway standing up for them. That was all good. I enjoyed that. I mean, I have some nitpicks on that. I do feel like that they made a big deal about augments not being able to join Starfleet, and Janeway's argument was basically, augment, schmogment, and then I mean, she did give that speech about how Dal has these 26 different species in him, and that represents the Federation. But the Federation has been portrayed as being very, very anti-augments. So I can't see how any way in hell that would change their minds. Unless you want to say, I mean, this is kind of later in the timeline than any of the other episodes that we have seen that portray augments being, like, outcast by the Federation. So maybe at this point in the Star Trek timeline, they're starting to ease up on that a little. I don't know. I didn't quite buy that they would let Dal in, though. But that's a nitpick. Other than that, I do think there was a lot of really nice moments in that final episode. So emotionally, it was a pretty good way to end the show. And I would say, again, a very decent Star Trek show. Not an amazing, not a mind-blowing Star Trek show, but a decent one. And that's pretty good, because the first half of the season I didn't think was anywhere close to a decent Star Trek show. I thought that it was a childish kid show, that they lied to me and told me that it was for adult Trekkies, but it wasn't. Whereas by the end of the second half of the season, I did feel like, okay, this is a decent Star Trek show. Not the best, but pretty decent. And there's definitely some good moments that you can hang your hat on throughout the second half of the season. Okay, so I was about to give my rating out of 10, but there's actually one more thing I forgot to mention about the finale. Speaking of unnecessary cliffhangers, what's the deal with the unnecessary cliffhanger at the end of the episode where Janeway introduces the Protostar class, and Dal's like, oh, is that the ship we're going on? And she's like, no, I have something much bigger planned for us. Dun dun dun. And what? What is it? Why did you just say it? Why the unnecessary cliffhanger? Obviously, it has to be Voyager. In fact, I saw a thumbnail for Trek Culture's video. I haven't watched it yet because it hasn't premiered yet, but they have like they're honing in on the numbers on one of the shuttlecrafts, and somehow they've decided that this is Voyager A, which was my immediate thought. Oh, this is probably Voyager A. But why do we have to leave that in suspense? Just fucking say that we're going on Voyager. That would be, what a wonderful way that would have been to end the season. Like, oh, it's Voyager, yay! Like, that would have been, like, why the unnecessary cliffhangers? Prodigy still has a lot of kinks to work out. These unnecessary cliffhangers gotta go. Anyways, so let me go ahead and give my rating out of 10. So I'm looking at the season as a whole. And the funny thing is, I've already recorded my video for the top 10 best shows of 2022, which you won't actually see until tomorrow because it premieres Friday at midnight West Coast time. But I've recorded it, and as part of that video, I show numbers 31 through 11, my rankings for all 31 shows that I've watched. I do 31 through 11, like really quickly scrolling up the screen. So Prodigy is in that group, and I put the rating out of 10 next to each show in that 31 through 11 range. And I had to record that before I could watch the finale of Prodigy because that's when I had time to make that video. So I was like, well, I'm just going to put a rating on here that I think is going to be the rating for Prodigy, and hopefully the finale sticks to that rating. And yeah, so after watching the finale, I will stick to the rating that I put on my top 10 best shows. And again, Prodigy's not in the top 10, but it's in that 31 through 11 range that I also will show you on the screen. So I'm going to stick to that rating. So I'm looking at the whole season. I gave the first half of the season a 3. I would probably give the second half of the season, I think, an 8. So my overall rating for the season as a whole, all 20 episodes, I'm going to give it a 6. In some ways, I almost feel like I'm being too generous because of how bad the first half of the season was, and how I just really felt pissed off and annoyed and deceived because I felt directly lied to because I did not feel like it was for me. But I think it's fair to double the score after the second half of the season. So I'm going to give it a 6. It is a 6 out of 10. Still a very solid 4th place when it comes to Modern Track, as I said. Although I think it has potential, if it kind of builds off of the stuff that it did in the second half of the first season, it has potential to eventually overtake Discovery, especially since Discovery seems to be doing some Indiana Jones adventure thing in season 5, which I'm not thrilled about. So I think it has a chance to overtake Discovery for 3rd place. I can't ever see it getting remotely close to Lower Decks and Strange New Worlds, in my opinion. Yeah, it's a 6 out of 10. And I'll watch season 2. I will watch season 2. I think it has potential to become a better Star Trek show, not just a show for kids, but also a better Star Trek show. All right, that does it for my review for Star Trek Prodigy Season 1. Please join me tomorrow. As I have already stated, I have already recorded my top 10 best shows of 2022, so that's really exciting. You should check that out. And also did a year in review about my transition for the year 2022. And so those videos will drop at the same time. You should watch them both, and you should, for God's sake, subscribe if you haven't already. And I will see you all really soon. Goodbye.